Our secret government. So much we're told, and so much we'll never know. But what happens when one man, retired now with nothing left to lose, steps forward with a story too strange, too dangerous to keep quiet? Hidden corporations with no names, secret laboratories buried deep in Virginia soil, and a creature almost human that spoke to him. You're about to find out. Listen to this story and the others, one in Pennsylvania and another in California. Are they experiencing something similar? Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. Different buildings, different faces, but the same silence behind reinforced walls. A retired federal agent pulls back the curtain on government shell corporations, secret labs, and a pale being that still haunts his memories today. My name is Raymond Keller. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived quietly in Roanoke, Virginia for the last 20 years. Before that, I spent most of my career serving the federal government. My title was never something you'd see on a business card. Officially, I was listed as an operations liaison. Unofficially, I was the middleman between classified defense projects and the people in charge of keeping them hidden. I was recruited into federal service after doing a tour in Vietnam. I wasn't a hero by any means, but I had a knack for logistics and a talent for keeping my mouth shut. That was enough for the people who came looking for me in the early 1980s. They told me I'd be part of something bigger, something vital to national security. I believed them. Back then, I thought I was protecting my country. For nearly 2 decades, I worked under a patchwork of shell corporations, companies that didn't exist except on paper. They had names like Mid-Atlantic Research Group or Continental Systems, bland fronts for operations buried deep underground. The government formed dozens of these entities to move money, hire contractors, and keep activities invisible. If you looked them up, you'd find a P.O. box and maybe a receptionist, but the real work was happening in hidden facilities attached to military bases or in isolated buildings scattered across the country. One of those buildings is still burned into my mind. In Manhattan, on a street where everyone was too busy to notice, stood a tall structure with no windows, just gray concrete walls and heavy steel doors. The people who worked there were ghosts. They went in before dawn, left after dark, and never spoke a word outside. Inside, there were fortified elevators that led below street level, not up. I was only inside once, and even then I saw only corridors and doors I wasn't cleared to open. My role was mostly security oversight. I wasn't the man behind the microscope, but I was the one ensuring contractors didn't step out of line, that files were moved securely, and that no one walked away with evidence. I reviewed protocols, observed tests, and filed reports up the chain. I thought I was making sure dangerous technology didn't fall into the wrong hands. But eventually, I realized it was already in the wrong hands. The projects I witnessed weren't just weapons or surveillance. They were biological. The government had in its possession entities it didn't want the public to know about. Some of them looked like us, some didn't. I saw 3 broad categories over the years: the human-like ones. They could pass in a crowd, a little off in their mannerisms. Sometimes their eyes were wrong, but if you weren't looking closely, you wouldn't notice. Rumor was some were already out there, living among the public, monitored but unacknowledged. Then there are the altered ones. I don't know if they started human or not. These were things with stretched limbs, wrong proportions, skin that looked burned or diseased. They were kept in the deepest parts of the facilities. Guards whispered they were failed experiments, but nobody ever said, failed at what? Lastly, the unknown species. This is what I saw in Virginia, beings that didn't fit into any category. Not human and not animal. The Virginia lab was one of the worst. On the outside, it looked like a satellite testing facility. The real work happened 2 levels below ground. That's where I met the pale one. It was thin, fragile-looking, with skin almost transparent. Its veins ran blue under the surface. Its head was large compared to its body, with those black, liquid eyes that seemed to swallow the light. No nose to speak of, just slits, and a small mouth that never moved. The scientists weren't just observing it. They were probing, cutting, attaching wires to its temples. They treated it like livestock. They stuck needles into its arms, its chest. I saw one doctor slice a strip of skin, watching how it healed. It did heal, but slower than us. They drew its blood until it fainted. They shined lights in its eyes, blasted sounds at it, forced it to solve puzzles on screens while hooked up to electrodes. And all the while, it never spoke. Not aloud. But when I stood near the glass, I felt it. A voice in my head. Not English, not any language I knew, but I understood anyway. Just one word. Help. That word hit me harder than anything in my career. It wasn't begging loudly. It was a quiet plea, desperate and resigned. I froze, because if I reacted, the others might have noticed. Its eyes locked on mine. I knew then it wasn't just some specimen. It was alive, aware, and terrified. Afterward, one of the civilian analysts with me pulled me aside. He was pale as a sheet. He asked if I'd heard it too. I denied it, but his hands were shaking. He left the program weeks later. The records say he resigned. I think they let him walk to avoid attention. I've never been able to find him since. Another colleague, Maria Torres, confided in me a few months later. She admitted she'd seen multiple beings, some stored in containment pods, others in restraints. She said she'd asked the wrong questions and was warned off. Shortly after, she was reassigned. I never heard from her again. What bothered me most wasn't just what they did, but how systematic it all was. Every procedure was recorded, cataloged, studied. They weren't experimenting in chaos. They had decades of methods, as if this had been going on long before I arrived. Some of the gruesome things I saw were amputations, especially amputating limbs. I saw the pale ones days after the amputation, and the scar tissue formed differently, thicker, almost armored. They would expose them to radiation, chemicals, extreme temperatures. Some died. Others lingered, sick and trembling, only to be disposed of when they stopped being useful. I once walked past a lab where one of the altered beings, something that looked half human, half wrong, was strapped to a chair while electrodes fried its nervous system. Its mouth opened in a scream, but no sound came out. Just silence. The worst thing was how routine it all was. Scientists joked, guards yawned, files were stamped. To them, these beings weren't alive. They were projects. For years, I swallowed it. I told myself speaking out would destroy me, that no one would believe me. But lately, I don't care anymore. I'm nearing 70. My life is mostly behind me, and I know in my gut that those labs are still operating. The shell corporations still exist. The windowless buildings still stand. Maybe some people will dismiss this, but I saw what I saw. Pale beings, altered forms, human-like figures who weren't quite human. I saw them interrogated, cut open, tested like lab rats. I don't know where they come from, but I do know the truth has been buried for too long. A maintenance man in rural Pennsylvania says, a night job at Kinzua Bridge turned into a coordinated attack by pale, hairless bipeds with slit throats that breathe. He claims ring-shaped residue, 3-toed tracks, a dragged roadblock, and a locked escape gate that wasn't standard. If you've encountered anything like what you'll hear in this story, add your report in the comments. Hello, my name is Thomas Delaney. I am 57 years old. I was born in Kane, Pennsylvania, and I still live here. I work part-time as a maintenance contractor on roads and small structures around McKean County. I handle brush removal, debris clearing, and light equipment operation. This is a straight account of what happened to me and my coworker, Eric, at Kinzua Bridge State Park on a night job last fall. I have written it as carefully as I can. I have not changed anything to make it sound better or worse. The park department scheduled us for a debris clear on a service road that runs below the skywalk. Tourists use the skywalk during the day. At night, it is empty. We had a compact excavator, a utility truck, a light mast on a small trailer, and hand tools. Our goal was to pull deadfall off the slope above the service road and stack it for chipping later. The job should have taken 3 hours. It turned into 8, and then something that I can't file under equipment or weather or animals. We started late because the excavator blew a hydraulic line. We swapped to a spare hose from the truck bins. The light mast threw a strong white rectangle onto the slope. The rest of the place was dark. You can stand in that light and see your breath and every drifting insect. Step out of it, and your eyes need a full minute to adjust. At about 8:40 p.m., I heard steady weight on leaves above us. Not a rustle, not a squirrel run. Each footfall had a clear crush and lift. It ended when Eric swung his headlamp up. The stillness that followed had weight to it. We both stood quiet, waiting for the follow-up. There was none. I asked if there were campers. He said the ranger had cleared the lot. We went back to the hose. 10 minutes later, stones came down from the same ridge, not from loosened dirt. They struck in a line from left to right and ended near the bucket. One hit the tooth and rang. Eric threw his hands up and yelled for whoever was there to cut it out. No answer. We killed the excavator and climbed the slope with our lights. We did not find anyone. We found prints. They were not boots. They were not hooves. I crouched and set my fist beside one. The track was wider than my hand. 3 blunt toes at the front. The mud was pushed deep in a clean shape and then broken at the heel. The spacing between prints was odd, not the stride you see with people. The ground was damp from a storm 2 days earlier, so prints held well. We followed them to a fallen tree. On the far side, on the bark, we found a thick, dark fluid smeared along the grain. Under our light, it had a dull sheen. It was not motor oil, and it was not sap. I told Eric we should back down and call it in. He wanted to keep to the plan and finish the job. I told him I wanted a quick look along the creek cut, and then we would go. That was a mistake. We stepped along the bench toward the sound of water. The smell changed. Cold air came up the gully, and I could smell hot metal, not smoke. The kind of smell you get when a grinder has just been on steel and the dust hangs in the air. I raised my light. Something crouched near the water. My brain tried to put it into a box that was familiar. It did not fit. It was the size of a man, but compacted into a low posture, with the spine in a tight curve and the legs folded under at a sharp angle. The knees bent the wrong way for a person. The skin had no hair, and it was pale. The head had a flat front, with no lip line. Where I expected a mouth, there was only a smooth plane that ran from under the nose area to the chin. Along both sides of the throat, I saw small vertical openings. They opened and closed in a slow pattern. No sound came out of them at that moment. The eyes caught my light and sent back a dull, yellow reflection. No blink. It turned its body without standing and faced us. My hand tightened on the pry bar. The thing drew in air through those openings on its neck. The draw had a dry rasp, as if those slits had edges that scraped. A second later, I heard the same draw from behind and above us. I did not turn my light back to the ridge. I kept it on the one in front of me because moving my light off of it felt wrong in my gut. We eased backward. It did not lunge. It held still in that bent posture. Then it pushed its hands into the ground and uncoiled into a taller stance. The arms hung too low. The fingers were not long in the way I have heard in other stories. but the palms looked wide and the fingertips had callus pads that shone. The throat openings flexed again and released a thin hiss. I could feel the hair at the back of my neck stand, but I did not run. Eric whispered that we should go. I nodded and kept my beam on it until we hit the break in the brush, and then we moved fast. We reached the service road. The excavator was not where we left it. It had slid or been pushed a clean 2 feet sideways. You can tell when a machine creeps on its own because the tracks leave a curve in the dirt. This was a straight shift, like a shove. The light mast ran fine, but its cable had been pulled tight and kinked around the trailer tongue. Our truck's rear door stood open. Several bins were out on the ground. I scanned the area and saw something on the truck door. 4 ring marks in a row, edge to edge, set at shoulder height. They were dark and tacky with the same dull sheen as the smear on the tree. The pattern looked like the throat slit spacing. I will not claim I am certain of that, but that was my first thought. I touched one ring with the tip of my pry bar and it left a string before it broke. The smell of hot metal was stronger there. We both climbed in the truck to get out. The dome light came on. Eric turned the key. Nothing. Not a click, not a dim power surge. The battery had been fine all day. I checked the terminals. They were tight. The master cutoff that we never touch had been rotated to off. I turned it back and told him to try again. The engine dug in a quarter second and then cut out. We argued for 30 seconds and then I told him we were not going to sit in a dead truck. We were going to get to the main lot on foot. He grabbed his hatchet and a small flashlight. I kept the pry bar. We left the truck doors shut and locked to protect our gear and moved down the access road with my light ahead and his sweeping behind. At the first curve, the road pinched to a narrow bench with a drainage ditch on the inside. Eric's boot slid and he dropped to his knee in the ditch. He let out a hard breath and said his knee popped. I got him up. He could walk, but not well. The next sign came from the trees to our right. A thin shape moved between 2 trunks and then froze dead center between them. It stood upright with the arms hanging. The eyes reflected dull yellow again. It stepped once. The knee went forward in reverse of a human. That joint movement was the detail that sticks the hardest in my mind. It followed the line of the trees and matched our speed. I called 911 on my phone right there. We were on a slight rise and I had a bar. I gave the dispatcher the park name, the service road, and that 2 men needed police. The call broke up, but I think it went through because a minute later, my phone showed the timer still running, and then it cut. If anything saved us, it was that call. We reached the elbow where the road bends toward the main lot. A tree blocked the way. It had not fallen. Drag marks ran across the packed dirt for 15 feet. Bark was shaved on the roadside. The cut at the base was old, not fresh. Something had dragged that trunk out of the woods and placed it there. We stopped. Eric said we could climb it. I raised my light. I saw a second tree at the far end of the first, angled to make a wedge. There was no easy climb without turning our backs to the dark for too long. We turned around to check the slope for a go-around. That is when another one stood in the light of the mast back where we had come from. It had moved into the empty white rectangle. It did not shy from the glare. It faced us from 80 yards. The throat slits opened and closed in a slow rhythm. No noise that time. The skin held the glare and sent no shine, just a flat, pale tone. The eyes reflected dull yellow again. I counted the same 3 blunt toes where the foot met the dirt. It stood still long enough for a full breath, and then shifted out of the light and vanished. We needed a new route. I told Eric we would cut down slope to the creek and follow it out under the skywalk. The grade there is rough, but open enough. He nodded, and we stepped off the road and into brush that came up to the shins and then the thighs. The soil gave under our weight, and our boots sank. Stunted saplings grabbed our pants. We made it 50 yards and hit a section where the hillside had slumped in a small slide. The top layer flowed away months earlier and left a clay face. I went first and planted the pry bar in root lines to hold. My foot slid, my kneecap banged rock, and I tasted blood. I locked the bar and hauled over. Eric put his weight on a root that tore out and went down the face on his hip. His flashlight skidded into brush. He cursed and said the knee was worse. He could still put weight on it, but there was a tremble in his voice now that I had never heard from him before. We found the creek. The water was low and slid around dark stones with a clean sound. On the near bank I saw more prints. 3 blunt toes, wide pad, heel broken. They went in and out of the water and continued on the other side. In the beam, I could see the edges of the prints had not slumped yet, which meant they were recent. That was a problem, because the path I had chosen ran along the same ground those things used. We stayed on the near side and moved fast. The skywalk towers rose ahead as black columns against a barely lighter sky. Fog formed in the low area. It was not a thick fog. It was enough to take the edges off shapes and swallow the ends of your light. We kept moving. At the bend where the creek tucks under old footings, metal stands in concrete with anchor bolts cut flush. I put my boot down near one and my foot slipped on slick algae. My light swung and hit something on the concrete face. 4 more ring marks in a row. Same spacing as the truck door. The dark substance sat in tidy circles and ran a thin line down to the footing base. It was fresh. I raised the pry bar for no good reason, other than that it was what I had. The first real rush came then. Brush broke on both banks. 2 shapes moved at the same time in a mirror line to each other. The sound of their steps matched. They pressed in and then eased back, in and back, setting a pattern. I do not know if they understood that this kept us spinning our lights and wasting time, but that was the effect. I forced myself to stop swinging the beam and to hold one line. The nearest shape halted and held the exact edge of my light, as if it had learned the line that kept it out of full view. We reached the embankment below the skywalk. There is a service stair there. It is narrow and steep with a cage around it. The lower gate had a hasp and a chain. The lock that the park uses is usually on the top of the chain. A different lock hung there that night. It was new and clean and did not match the set I carry. We could not go up that way. That was our no way back moment. We had come downslope through ground we did not want to repeat with the knee. The road behind us had a tree dragged across it. The stair was chained with a lock we could not open. The creek route forward pinched to a blind slot. Staying still felt like an invitation for those things to close in. We had to do something. The main lot lay uphill and east. The shortest line was to cut across the base of the towers and then climb the slope to the lot through brush. That meant we would put our backs to open ground several times. There was no better option. We moved in bursts. I held the front. Eric held rear guard with his small light. When we crossed the open patch between towers, we both felt exposed. I kept my light high and moved quick. Halfway through the crossing, the portable light mast back at the work site cut out. The white rectangle went black in the corner of my eye. The park fell to full dark, our 2 beams, and a small gleam from the skywalk rail above. The sudden loss of that anchor light did something in my chest that I do not have a clean word for. It was a drop. I told Eric we were okay. He said nothing. We cleared the open patch, entered brush, and began the climb. Branches grabbed our clothes. The soil gave. My legs burned and my knee throbbed where I had hit the rock. The smell of hot metal returned, stronger than before. It came in a wave and then eased. Something crashed through brush 20 yards to our left and then stopped dead. I listened. The only sound was our breath. We topped out at a maintenance fence that runs behind the lot. It had a gate panel with a pin and a chain. The pin had been pulled free, and the chain was wrapped 3 times and tied in a way that looked rushed. I pulled the chain off and shoved the gate out. We stepped through and into the lot's edge. Gravel under boots. The lot was empty. No cars, no ranger truck. I raised my phone again for a call. 2 bars now. I dialed 911. The call connected. I said the name of the park and that we needed officers at the main lot. The operator said something I could not hear and then told me to stay on the line. I kept it open. Headlights turned in from the park road 2 minutes later. 2 vehicles. Park police. I waved my light. They pulled up and got out. The first officer asked what happened. I started to explain. While I spoke, I looked past him and saw one of the shapes at the tree line at the far edge of the lot. It stood still with the arms down and the head turned toward us. The eyes gave that dull yellow reflection. I pointed and told them. The officer swung his spotlight, but by the time the beam reached the tree line, the shape was gone. They told us to sit on the curb by the restroom and take a breath. They moved around with lights for a minute, then came back. They said they did not see anyone. They asked if we had run into kids. I told them the tree on the access road had been dragged. I told them about the prints, the ring marks, the excavator shift, and the lock on the stair. The older of the two told me the access road is low and can play tricks on sound, and that kids do use the park at night. I asked if he wanted to see the tree across the road. He said they would check it. Another truck pulled in, not park police. A man in a plain jacket stepped out and talked to the officers away from us. They did not tell us who he was. He walked over and asked for our names and employers and a quick rundown. He spoke in a calm tone and did not react to the details. He asked if we had taken photos. I had not. I do not have an excuse. I had no extra hands for a phone in that slope, and I had no wish to slow down to frame pictures. He asked if we had touched the fluid we saw on the tree or the truck door. I told him only the tip of my pry bar had made contact. He wrote that down and asked where the bar was. I said it was on the ground near the lot where I set it. He nodded and walked away again. They told us we were good to go home and that they would secure our gear. I wanted to stay and show them the roadblock and the prints and everything else. They said they had it. Eric stood up and nearly fell when his knee took weight. The older officer looked at it and told him to get it checked. We drove out in the back of the second parked truck. I went home and took a shower and slept 2 hours. I woke before daylight and drove back to the park. I parked in the main lot and walked the access road with the morning light. The dragged tree was cut into pieces and stacked to the side. I checked the dirt for the track of the drag. Nothing. The surface had been graded since the night before. The light mast stood back on, and the excavator sat in the exact place we had first left it, not the 2 feet over position. The truck door was shut and clean. No ring marks. The locker bins were back inside. The service stair had the usual lock again. The new one was gone. I checked the place on the concrete footing where the rings had been. The face had been wiped, and the wipe left a wide, clean spot that did not match the rest of the tone. It looked washed. I found my pry bar in the bed of our truck. The tip had a thin film on it with a dried edge. I set it in a rag and sealed it in a zipper bag. I kept that bag for 3 days. On the 4th day, my supervisor called me into the office. The man in the plain jacket sat in a chair in the corner. He said he was from a regional office and wanted to close the loop on our incident. He asked for the pry bar because it was park property. My supervisor looked at me in a way that told me to hand it over. So I did. The man set it in a hard case and left without more words. That was the last I saw of him. Eric won't talk about that night. He will not take night shifts anymore, and he avoids jobs near the gorge. He told me he wakes up with a pressure on his throat and a smell in his nose that he cannot clear. I understand that. My own detail that returns is the joint on that leg bending forward when it stepped. I cannot unsee that. I went back to the truck door that same week to look at the paint in daylight. There were 4 faint rings I could only see from a shallow angle in sun. They were not dark anymore. They were matte and only a change in gloss. I traced them with a fingertip and felt a slight edge. I filed a short incident report through our contractor portal. A week later, when I checked my copy, it had a note added that said, "Wildlife harassment by unknown individuals," and "equipment left unsecured by crew." That is not what happened. The next job brief included a reminder about locks and equipment shutdown. The supervisor's tone made it clear he considered the matter settled. I am not writing this to fight with anyone. I am writing because I need a record outside their system. If anyone else has seen the same thing that stands on two legs, or the ring pattern, or the three blunt toes with a heel break, I want them to know they are not alone. Three friends walk past a locked fence and a quiet concrete pad in the Anza Borrego Badlands, expecting a lost drone and an easy hike. They find a powered trailer with lab tags and catch a glimpse of a pale face that moves in short bursts. This story comes to us from Evan near San Diego, California. If you have any idea what this might be, please tell me in the comments. My name is Evan Delaney, and I'm sending this because the short report I filed left out the parts that keep waking me up. I inspect flood control gates and telemetry boxes across the east edge of San Diego County, so I know where the service spurs dive into the Badlands and where people aren't supposed to drive. And I know the feel of that desert when it goes quiet in March and the wind only moves in thin blades along the walls. I brought two people out there on a calm night to recover a downed drone. 2 nights earlier, the Valley Facebook groups blew up about a rolling boom and a helicopter that crossed the basin without lights. Windows shaking, dogs going off, the usual noise when training ramps up. I ignored it. On our night, the moon was a thin cut and gone early. The wash bottoms were packed and pale. The smell at the truck was creosote, dust, and old rubber. I picked up my friend Luis Ortega at the junction. His drone had died west of a concrete pad locals call Ocotillo Bench, and I picked up my friend Marina because she's a WFR. We hiked the faint service road to the pad, a square of concrete with a locked metal cabinet that hummed. Fresh UTV tread had cut a clean circle and left. No backing marks, no footprints. A shallow slot lay beyond the pad. The drone was on its back with a cracked gimbal. The battery light dead. Someone had marked 2 black triangles on the slot wall, and higher up along the lip, the dust carried long, narrow fingertip digs that ran deep at the ends. First to fourth tip measured 9 inches. No palm print, no heel. We climbed from the slot with the drone in Luis's pack and followed the wash west, and found a small work trailer like the kind used for a makeshift field office. I heard the inverter fan running, and inside was a folding table, a thermal printer, a clear bag of barcoded lab tags, and a cheap handheld Geiger counter that was chirping. A cooler held 3 small stainless cups, and the air had that hot plastic metallic bite you get from overworked inverters. We saw a face lean through the grate without the rest of the head. A pale face with a long slit where the mouth should be, and above it, dull gray eyes. It then produced a string of hard clicks with deliberate gaps. 4, 7, pause, 4, 7, longer pause. Each time the Geiger counter jerked from baseline to a soft scream and then fell dead, the spikes stepping in sync with the clicks like someone was dialing numbers through us. I reached for the door to slam it, but the hands came where the wall meets the frame. 4 narrow fingers from each side pressed flat and widened at the tips, the nails dull and thick, the skin thin enough to show a pale web at each joint. The motion came in short segments that reversed halfway through, like the joints were traveling out of sequence like it didn't have control of its own joints. The fingers pushed until the door bowed inward, lifted, and reset lower. And on the second push, a line of moisture smeared the frame. It smelled like a hot metal stink that set a copper taste along the back of my tongue. In the light, that smear looked iridescent. Not wet like spit, more like thin oil. A helicopter flew overhead and the light cut the wash. It must have got scared because it removed its hands and dust blew as it took off. For a few minutes, the only sound was the inverter. When the helicopter light fully drifted south, we heard a cluster of clicks, then a single flat tone, the kind of tone that fills the ear with pressure. Marina dropped her jaw and swallowed as if she were trying to equalize the pressure, like if you were in a plane. It crossed the trailer wall without touching the floor. 4 fingertips holding, torso flattening like soft cartilage pressed to steel, the head turning slowly. The slit where the mouth should be tightened and produced a word. Help. It sounded strange, but I knew what it was saying. Then it said my name, Evan, and then Marina's. The slit widened, and a pale ridge rose behind it. Not teeth, not tongue, just a firm structure traveling forward and back like a tool pushing through a seal. We shoved the table up as a brace, and the counter spiked into a continuous scream. Then it fell to 0. And in the same second, the wall dented from the outside, where the metal wanted to give. The fan shuddered and stopped before it caught again. We ran away as fast as we could. As I turned to the fence, a head rose behind the slot lip at the edge of my light, first the eyes, then the mouth, then a hand reaching up. Then it slid sideways in clean jumps, 12 to 18 inches at a time. Then we heard it laugh. It sounded evil. We crossed the fence, moved onto the service road. There was a vibration running down the line toward the wash like a signal traveling, and that made my stomach drop. We continued to move on. My mobile radio showed power, and then my voice came over the handheld. Evan, over, but in a clipped tone I never use, the last syllable shaved off. Then it said my name again, but this time from behind us, not from the speaker. We reached the wider wash and saw a UTV across it, 2 people in dark jackets with reflective strips. They said, "Leave now due to a night operation." No names, no agency. And in the bed, a clamshell case with foam cutouts and a small hard case with a faded biohazard sticker rubbed nearly smooth. They let us through without asking any questions. Under the gas station canopy, we drank water and watched our hands shake. And the photos that should have shown the door and the eyes came up as solid green tiles and black squares. And the one image that did show was the counter reading 0.15 with a timestamp that was 4 hours wrong. We sat there and said nothing for a long time. It was probably the strangest experience I ever had, and we have no idea what we witnessed that night. We still talk about it all the time, but never to anyone else, fearing they will think we are crazy or just making stories up. I'll tell you one thing, I won't go out there at night anymore. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.